Welcome back to Direct Station, where politics and planets collide and converge. I am Kate Carey. For those just joining us, we are bridging events in the sky with the events here on Earth. We're doing that because it needs doing. We're doing that together because it makes us feel less alone and perhaps even more hopeful about what's unfolding. There's weather in the sky that's bigger than the hurricanes and the tornadoes, bigger than El Nino or the tropical air mass. The stuff that's moving out there, the minor and the major bodies, have an effect on us, on how we feel, on how things unfold, on what energy is rising, on massive movements. So, in the way that El Nino affects the quality of bird breeding in the Pacific Northwest, for example, by making things greener in the wintertime, so too does a significant event with the planets and asteroids and stars get us moving. It correlates and it's predictable. Leaves lots of room for our choices. The birds don't have to mate just because it's green, and they can certainly make choices about who and where, right? So it's worth looking into and understanding. And what I find is that it gives me a greater respect for the big picture view of what's happening down here. Not to spiritually bypass, but to feel like we're part of something larger than ourselves. And this madness is an opportunity to learn about that, to reflect on the magnitude of it all, to be fully present as the horror and the beauty unfolds around us, right in front of us, and to make some solid choices accordingly about how we want to conduct ourselves in the hours, days, and weeks ahead. So, as you may have noticed, we are in one of the most astrologically intense periods of our lifetimes, certainly of human history, even, with multiple major phenomena converging all at once, many of which have never converged at the same time. Or if they have done, it's rarely. The intensity that built through March and early April isn't diminishing. In fact, this week brings some of the most powerful planetary alignments we've ever seen. And a bunch of what we're looking at has never happened before. So we've got a front row seat as the tides shift really dramatically on this planet. Today, I want to dive into two major events that happened over the Easter weekend. It may surprise you to know that Easter is celebrated by upwards of 70 or 80% of Americans, depending on where you look, and as much as a third of the global population. So it's a huge event in the world, even if it's not in your own home. But throughout the world, ranging from feel-good family, secularized rituals involving bunnies and eggs to profoundly sacred expressions of grief and ultimately celebration. This expected but somehow still shocking death of Pope Francis, as well as the so-called Easter ceasefire in Ukraine, therefore present themselves as profound events in the profane narrative unfolding, but also the spiritual journey for many of the humans around us. Both of these events carry deeply felt symbolic weight, and both reflect the incredible planetary alignments we're currently experiencing. So we're going to look at both and the politics rumbling around both. And within them, of course, as always, we'll find our way to that actionable hope at the center of what we are experiencing, because we have got to live in hope. And the weather is ripe for hope. It's ripe for action, for intense experience, and for massive, massive change. So let's start with the Vatican and see what the planets might tell us about this pivotal moment. The death of Pope Francis this Easter weekend marks the end of a papacy that challenged many traditional Catholic positions, while upholding many others, to be clear. What makes this transition especially significant, though, is that one of Francis's final public acts was a direct rebuke of the current American administration's immigration policies. In February, Pope Francis, the first pope born outside of Europe in more than 1,300 years, and the first ever Latin American pope, and the first Jesuit pope, writes an open letter to American bishops in February. We should add up, there are several American bishops, Catholic bishops, who are extremely aligned with the policies, the mindset, the activities, the politics of the right in the United States. I should say of the Trump administration in the United States. So the Pope writes an open letter to American bishops in February, criticizing the immigration policies of the Trump regime, calling the events unfolding in the United States a major crisis, saying it, quote, violates the dignity of many men and women and of entire families, and that it would, quote, end badly. How can we argue? The letter came after Vice President J.D. Vance, a recently converted Catholic, he converted about 6 years ago, had made comments about immigration and Catholic teaching, specifically invoking the concept of ordo amoris to suggest that people should prioritize love for their families and communities over those from other countries. The people who are around me, who look like me, who are like me, prioritize them. He used this Catholic construct, which I should say addresses the idea of learning and preparing to care for all by caring for those in our immediate circle, those in our charge. In other words, by caring for my children, I gain the skill and the insight and the consciousness that will be required to care about and honor, to use Lisa Delpit's phrase, other people's children. So J.D. Vance uses this concept of ordo amoris to justify the administration's hardline immigration stance in which they are disappearing hundreds of people, aiming at millions, to be clear, of people born outside of American borders with little to absolutely zero due process, and in the worst cases, kidnapping them and submitting them to a foreign hellscape in El Salvador. So J.D. Vance is defending this hateful, frankly, unchristian stance of being more than unkind, being downright cruel and even sadistic. Sadistic, by the way, meaning enjoying other people's pain, deriving pleasure from other people's suffering. So having that orientation towards refugees in need, using this Catholic construct of ordo amoris, and as they do, redefining an entire ancient phrase. Pope Francis directly addresses this concept in his February letter, though. He says, Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests that little by little extend to other persons and groups. Instead, he says, quote, the true ordo amoris that must be promoted is love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception. So the Pope has this interaction with Vance in February, right? And then over the weekend, there's this fascinating series of events. The timing of the Pope's final acts and his passing reveal a divinity, reveal a divinely timed Easter weekend. And as profound and even devastating as these events are for so many people, it is hard to look at it and not respect the magnitude of what is unfolded. Easter is the holiest day in the Christian calendar. So on Friday, the Pope is visiting the Stations of the Cross. And he says, this is on Good Friday, he says, today, builders of Babel, he's talking about the West, I should say, to be clear. Today's builders of Babel tell us that there is no room for losers, and that those who fall along the way are losers. Theirs is a construction site of hell. Theirs is a construction site of hell, he said. On Saturday, Vance is hoping to meet with the Pope, but instead the Pope says, meet with my number two. Meet with him and the foreign minister. So then the central governing body of the Vatican releases a statement that says, yeah, we met, we talked about war, political tensions, difficult humanitarian situations, they said, with particular attention to, quote, migrants, refugees, and prisoners. You can be sure that the readout that Vance released said none of these words. On Sunday morning, the Pope himself finally then takes a moment to share oxygen with Vice President Vance, whose motorcade, I should say, was on Vatican territory for all of 17 minutes. But during those 17 minutes, the Pope saw him, gave him a few things, and had this meeting against the backdrop of these tensions about other people's children. But then, about an hour later, he appears in his wheelchair on his balcony, and he blesses the crowd in the strongest voice he's used in weeks. I'm sure you've been present while someone who is considering passing or is about to pass suddenly becomes much stronger, much more vital, much more fully alive, right? So he does this in front of everyone on the balcony. And he asks one of his lieutenants to read his message. And in his message, I'm going to quote it for you. He says, "We were not made for death, but for life. Easter is a celebration of life. God created us for life. and wants the human family to rise again. In his eyes, life is precious. The life of a child in the mother's womb, as well as the lives of the elderly and the sick, who in more and more countries are looked upon as people to be discarded. What a great thirst for death, for killing we witness each day in the many conflicts raging in different parts of our world. Exclamation points throughout this, I should say. How much violence we see, often even within families, directed at women and children. How much contempt is stirred up at times towards the vulnerable, the marginalized, and migrants! Exclamation point. On this day, I would like all of us to hope anew and to revive our trust in others, including those who are different than ourselves or who come from distant lands, bringing unfamiliar customs, ways of life, ideas. For all of us are children of God. I mean, one of the things I'm most struck by in this message is the care the man took in his final hours to literally name every spot on the globe affected by famine, war, cruelty, suffering. He mentions Myanmar, Azerbaijan, Syria, Gaza, Ukraine. And not 24 hours later, in the early hours of Monday, Rome time, the man Timothy Snyder describes as humble Francis and a force in the quote and a force of quote transcendent humanity was gone. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, during the same transformational 48 hours, we see another kind of religious symbolism being weaponized. President Putin of Russia suddenly announces a 30-hour Easter ceasefire on Saturday afternoon, just hours before he said it was to begin. Ukrainian officials were understandably skeptical, of course, but eventually said, sure, we can participate in that. We'll reciprocate if the Russians actually stop fighting. Well, they didn't, right? So they first kept things to a low hum, but then as Ukraine responded to that low hum, which includes drones and assault operations, right? In the end, Russia violates the ceasefire more than 2,900 times. Zelensky released a statement saying that Ukraine would continue to mirror the behavior of their aggressors. He says, we will respond to silence with silence, and our blows will be a defense against Russian blows. Actions always speak louder than words. So the timing and the theatricality of Putin's announcement, with the subtext of actually not doing what he said he was doing, this cannot be separated from the Trump administration's statements the day before. So on Friday, Secretary Rubio suggests that the U.S. might move on from trying to enter the war if the parties can't make progress. So the ceasefire announcement was clearly aimed at this small audience in Washington, positioning Russia as a peace-seeking entity while knowing full well the fighting would continue and perhaps Ukraine can be blamed. Perhaps it's enough of a mirage that Ukraine can be blamed. In fact, over the weekend, Fox News is displaying images from both Ukraine and Moscow, including an image of a man called Patriarch Kirill, who is an enemy to Ukraine and often weaponizes the church and Christianity in service of this holy war he believes Putin to be conducting by bombing high-rise apartment buildings where people live, and the schools children go to, and the theaters in which humans hide, and the hospitals in which they receive care for other wounds received elsewhere in these campaigns. So they're killing people by the thousands for more than 3 years. And Fox News is displaying images from both Ukraine and Russia, and including this incredibly controversial figure of this Russian Orthodox Church on the screen for more than 20 minutes while they're showing these images and sort of displaying this region of the world as peaceful and religious only. On the Chiron, it says Kyiv, Russia, on an American corporate news station. Kyiv, Russia. The network later apologizes for this, of course. But the obvious move here is to align with Russian propaganda regarding the total undoing of Ukraine as an entity, as a sovereign nation, siding with Putin, but also siding with this homicidal and corrupt religious leader. It was just a new level entirely for the station. Both of these events, though, the Pope's death after his moral challenge to power, his speaking truth to power, and the cynical use of Easter as a prop in Trump and Putin's geopolitical war and propaganda theater, reflect a powerful planetary alignment that is bringing long simmering tensions to a very real, very tangible head. There's two major astrological configurations that I want to address this week that are contributing to the intensity of this moment and why we're seeing such weighty metaphorical thresholds. And before I do, I just want to say to you that my mother told me this week that she listened to one of the episodes and she felt that there was too much information that she couldn't handle because she doesn't know anything about these planets. And she's like, I don't know who these characters are. I don't know who they mean. I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know what part of the sky they're from or what that part of the sky represents. I do not expect you to. I really see my role as sort of introducing these characters to you, introducing the flow of the energy and the kind of energy that comes through each week and the kind of intersection of energies that is coming at us at different times and kind of what it's causing, right? So, in naming these proper nouns that you probably have absolutely no awareness of, I am not trying to, all in one episode, teach you what these constructs represent or what these entities do, right? That's going to take time. I mean, if you want to study it, come, it's really fun. It's really cool. But I think over time, if we're having this conversation, you can start to acquire sort of a loose awareness of who is doing what where and what sort of an expression of these different bodies in a different spot in the sky might cause for you. But in the meantime, I really want you to think of it. I was thinking about this morning. I was walking my dog in the park, and I was thinking, you should think of this like a Game of Thrones, a new Game of Thrones series, right? Like, and you didn't watch the first season, and like all people you love are watching it, so you're like, fine, I'll join in. I didn't have time to catch up, but I'll catch up eventually, right? And you have no idea who the Targaryens are, and you have no idea who the Starks are, but like you can go along and get along, and the drama makes sense to you, and families struggling and fighting and winning and losing. Like you can follow along, and you understand kind of what the forces come to represent over time. Remember the first time we all watched those shows? Maybe it's just me, but like it wasn't at first that I like needed the map and needed to understand who was from where and what loyalties were and what the histories were. Like, you don't need to know all that to kind of get into it and enjoy it. So I'm assuming, I'm hoping that you're kind of at that early Game of Thrones phase where the drama is working for you and it's making meaning for you and it's allowing you to have some context about what you're living through without necessarily having to like have a notebook out. Um, but if you want, if you have an idea about how to do that differently, please do let me know. If you want to learn, we can do that too. But mostly I'm just trying to give you the vibe of what's happening and like persuasively argue that it's real and that it's weather and that it's impactful and that it has been impactful throughout history in really patterned ways. It's just cool. That's all. Okay, that entire section was for my mother. So maybe I'll cut it out, but maybe it'll be helpful to you. You never know. Okay, so we're going to talk about two phenomena today. One is involving these two guys who are at opposite ends of the circle. So remember, the sky is a big circle, and you've got one of these guys on one side, and literally exactly opposite, 180 degrees opposite in the circle is the other guy. So one guy is, I should say, we don't talk about these guys very much on the podcast because they haven't been really doing too much that's been impacting everybody else yet. Here they come, though. They're officially and finally, and again, very, very, very critical to what we're seeing unfold on Earth. So these two players are Mars and Pluto. Mars, I'm guessing is the Roman god of war. His name was chosen for the bright red light in the sky by the ancient ones who noticed that these big things happened when it was on the move. So they took this archetypal name of this god of war and assigned it to that red light in the sky. So when big things related to action or causation or conflict or even war were happening, they noticed a correlation between how that planet was moving. And then we've got Pluto, who's the Roman god of the underworld. But importantly, the Roman underworld and the underworld of most traditions outside of Judeo-Christian ideology is not hell as we have come to understand it. The land of the dead in most traditions is not this sort of eternal punishment for human imperfections or being outside of some human construct of what is socially righteous or not, right? But rather, it's a place that is about death, loss, rebirth. Importantly, it's about transformation through intense experiential change. This then is Pluto's realm. Like if you've ever gone through something that almost, I mean this almost metaphorically, though not always, but something that almost killed you. A time when you thought you were, a time when who you thought you were was changed irrevocably forever, for better or worse, usually for better, because some kind of chrysalis, some kind of test or experience or journey, right? Most of us, especially now that we're old, many of us are old. I'll speak for myself. I've lived through this sort of experience multiple times, right? Where you're like, I don't know if I can come out of this all right, right? Like, I don't know if this is going to be the end of me or not, but it isn't. And when you come out of it, you have evolved, you have become a new version of yourself. That's Pluto, right? And when we are causing things or we have an impetus to fight or to be aggressive or to be agentic, that's Mars. So we've got Mr. Underworld, Mr. Transformation opposing. Again, opposing means across from each other in the sky. Mr. Action, Mr. Aggression, Mr. War. So you've got Mr. Transformation and Mr. Aggression. So we're going to see an exact opposition between these two planets this week, but we're already experiencing that transit. What's more, the skylands that they're visiting while they have this opposition are super relevant. So Mars is in Leo, which is the section of the sky representing the me. The me. My daughter's a Leo, and we have this video of her when she was like, I don't know, 6 or 7. And she was like, Mommy, take a video. And I was like, of what? And she goes, of me. So that's Leo, right? The ego, the self, the will, the action, the assertion as an individual. That's in Leo. And Mars, Mr. Aggression, Mr. Dynamism is there, right? While Pluto, Mr. Transformation, is in Aquarius, which embodies collective power, systemic change, the change of authority, and journeys to the beyond. So when these two face off directly across the sky, we see power struggles between me and us, between fuck shit up and evolution through confrontation of pain and suffering, between conflict and intensity. And that becomes dramatically visible, right? So alone, this sounds like a lot. So alone, this configuration sounds like a lot, right? Each time Mars and Pluto oppose each other, we see its signature in challenges to establish power structures, particularly religious and governmental authority. So when we look at the passing of the male head of Catholicism, the largest religious sect within the world's largest religion, we're witnessing both the death of a pope who challenged power and the theatrical manipulation of that death, and the holiday itself through religious symbolism and international conflict. Let's look, though, at the historical patterns of Mars and Pluto opposition to better understand this pattern. In 1517, an exact Mars-Pluto opposition coincides with Martin Luther's 95 Theses, which fundamentally challenges papal authority and triggers the Protestant Reformation. Months before the opposition in September of 1054, we see an event called the Great Schism between Eastern and Western Christianity, meaning the separation of the Eastern Orthodox branch of Christianity from the Roman Catholic Church. Perhaps the most significant fracturing of ecclesiastical authority in Christian history. More recently, the Mars-Pluto opposition of 1922 coincides with Pope Pius following the death of Benedict XV, along with Mussolini's march on Rome, creating a new power dynamic between the Vatican and fascist Italy. 1975-76 opposition occurs during major leadership transitions globally, including Francisco Franco ending his dictatorship in Spain. Each time Mars and Pluto oppose each other, we see this pattern of challenges to established power structures, particularly religious and governmental authority. So it's no surprise that we're witnessing both the passing of a pope who challenged power and the theatrical manipulation of religious symbolism in international conflict. We're even less surprised when we consider variable number two. So the second key factor is Neptune. Neptune is spirituality, dreams, disillusion. We've talked about him quite a lot recently. So he entered Aries after 14 years in Pisces. These are two sections of the sky, but he entered the new section of the sky, Aries, where he becomes more active, more on the move, more dream in motion rather than a dream suspended, right? So Neptune's currently forming a trine with Mars, Mr. War, and even approaching a conjunction with Saturn, Mr. Discipline. But we'll leave Saturn out of it mostly for today. So Neptune in Aries transforms how we experience spirituality and dreams, often making them more direct, more action-oriented, but also potentially more weaponized. The last time Neptune entered Aries was in 1862, during the American Civil War, which again, everybody's using kind of that phenomenon as a place to start understanding all of this. But I want to draw your attention to the period is a period of profound national identity crisis and spiritual reckoning about human dignity. Neptune's current position helps explain the theatrical nature of Putin's Easter ceasefire announcement and ploy, and the spiritual symbolism of the Pope's passing while fighting, speaking truth to power in this particular moment. But on top of this placement in Aries, Neptune, Mr. Dream, Mr. Spirituality, is in an opportunity aspect with Mars, planet of war, action, and causation. So these two planets are in an angle called a trine. That's your only real vocab word for today. It's an angle that's formed when two planets are, if you must know, 120 degrees apart in the zodiacal circle. So, right, so Mars and Pluto are here, and Mars and Neptune are here, sort of loosely, in an unbroken flow of energy then. So you got Mars, action, aggression, movement, and an unbroken flow of energy with illusion, disillusion, dream, spirituality. So this harmonious trine between Neptune and Mars is creating a particularly potent dynamic, one where spiritual idealism flows seamlessly into action, passionate action, where dreams become crusades. Crusades, you say? Well, let's look at it. So let's look at this as we try to understand the actions of the Kremlin and of the Trump administration, right down to both using the church to do harm and to justify harm. So yes, the actual crusades happened during a Mars-Pluto opposition. But what I want to look at in particular is Mars-Pluto oppositions with this trine from Neptune, right? This is not the first time that these cosmic alignments have coincided with moments where religion, power, and conflict converge. Let's explore some historical parallels that illuminate this current moment. More recent parallels, I should say. In 1939, Mars forms a trine with Neptune thrice, I like to say. So the one and the second one, so 1, 2, 3 times, because somebody was bouncing back and forth, right? So in the middle time is particularly revealing because it's coinciding with a rare configuration of Mars and Pluto. And by the way, Saturn was also doing the thing it's doing now, which we'll talk about another day. So you've got all these things that were happening then that are happening now in 1939. So this exact alignment marks the moment when Nazi Germany is actively preparing for war, and Hitler's rhetoric is consistently invoking divine purpose and religious imagery to justify his expansionist aggression, right down to, frankly, a natalist orientation about going back to the earth, going back to the farm. So Hitler's rhetoric consistently invokes divine purpose and religion to justify his expansionist aggression, a perfect manifestation of Mars in harmonious flow, Neptune. So a perfect manifestation of Mars as aggression and harmonious flow with Neptune, this idealism. By September of that year, when the final Mars-Neptune trine occurs, Poland's already fallen. The religious dimensions of the conflict are becoming apparent, with both sides using spiritual language to frame their positions. The Nazi government portrays itself as a crusade against godless communism, while simultaneously persecuting religious minorities. Fast forward way ahead to 2002 and 3, when Mars forms trines with Neptune on May 8th, 2002 and February 16th, 2003. This period precisely marks the buildup of the Iraq War, another conflict drenched in religious rhetoric. The Bush administration consistently frames the war on terror in quasi-religious terms of moral absolutes, good versus evil, us versus them. February 2003, just 1 month before the invasion begins, you see massive worldwide peace protests while government officials continue their spiritually tinged justifications for war. Does this sound familiar to you? Even even the November 1954 Mars-Neptune trine, which is also co-occurring with a Mars-Pluto opposition, is correlated with McCarthy's anti-communist crusade. So a movement that's explicitly positioning itself as defending, he said, Christian America all the time against this atheistic communism. So McCarthy regularly invokes religious imagery to justify his witch hunts and his destruction of people's whole lives, whole careers, whole reputations. What these historical moments share with our present situation is the dangerous alchemy that happens when Mars trines Neptune, meeting that Pluto opposition. Spiritual idealism of Neptune flows effortlessly into the aggressive action of Mars, while the power struggle symbolized by the Mars-Pluto opposition creates this backdrop of existential conflict. What will we become when this is over? So we're seeing this play out in real time with the Trump administration's invoking of Ordo Amoris to justify immigration cruelty. A perfect example of corrupting spiritual concepts to justify aggressive actions. Pope Francis, in his final days, stands against this very distortion. Similarly, Putin's exploitation of Easter for a sham ceasefire demonstrates the same cynical manipulation of religious symbols for power purposes. The planets don't cause these events, y'all, but they do reveal the archetypal energies at work. Like there will be a figure that rises that invokes religion or invokes their God in service of their cruel aims. When Mars trines Neptune during periods of Mars-Pluto tension, therefore, history shows us that spiritual language becomes weaponized. Religious symbols are manipulated for power, and conflicts take on these crusade-like qualities. As we witness the passing of Pope Francis, a leader who used his spiritual authority to challenge rather than bless earthly power, we're at a crossroads. Will we succumb to the darker expressions of these planetary energies where religion justifies cruelty and exclusion of the other? Or will we embody Francis's interpretation of Ordo Amoris, love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception? Francis represents a particular kind of spiritual authority whose values are challenging the collective to move in a more compassionate direction. His passing creates a vacuum that will test us. Certainly will test his institution, but is an invitation to our own testing, all of us, about whether these values continue forward or whether different forces take control. Now more than ever, we must decide. The cosmic weather suggests powerful transformations are ahead. Like previous historical moments under similar alignments, we face a choice between religion as a weapon or religion or spirituality as a healing force. Between Mars-Neptune energy channeled towards destructive crusades or towards compassionate, righteous action. It reminds me of Fyodor Dostoevsky's words from the brothers Karamazovs. There are these three powers, he says, three powers alone, able to conquer and to hold captive forever the conscience of these impotent rebels for their happiness. Those forces are miracle mystery, and authority. So what we're seeing now is this profound shift in how these three powers, miracle, Neptune, mystery, Pluto, and authority, Mars, function in our collective consciousness. Neptune in Aries is accelerating this process. Neptune represents our collective dreams and our spiritual ideals, but also our delusions and our escape. In Aries, Neptune becomes more assertive. Our spiritual ideals want to take direct action rather than remain contemplative. This explains the weaponization of Easter that we saw in Ukraine. It's spiritual symbolisms being used as a tool for geopolitical positioning and campaigns of destruction of the other. It also explains why the Pope's moral stance on immigration becomes so pointed and direct in his final hours. Theirs is a construction site of hell, he says. Neptune in Aries doesn't want to merely contemplate compassion. It wants to demand action based on spiritual principles. What makes this time particularly intense is that we're experiencing all these transits simultaneously. It's not just one planetary pattern. It's a multiple major configuration, all converging at once, creating what astrologers think of as a perfect storm of transformative energy. I can't tell you how many of them are saying something like, it's the biggest thing humans have ever seen. One way to understand what's happening comes from a frankly too often quoted passage from the mighty Toni Morrison in her novel, the greatest American novel, in my opinion, the greatest novel, in my opinion, in which she talks of the main character, Sethe, who has escaped from the layered horrors of enslavement and survived the cruel consequences of the law that followed her out. Sethe says, towards the end of the novel, freeing yourself was one thing, claiming ownership of that freed self was another. And that phrase, again, while often overused and misunderstood, is really apt here. We are collectively experiencing a liberation from old forms of spiritual and political authority, but the much harder work lies ahead. Claiming ownership of what comes next is the hard part. We just kind of mostly get to witness what happens as this thing comes undone. Right, but what do we do then? The Pope's death creates a space for new spiritual leadership, but what values fills that space? Ukraine's resistance creates the possibility of sovereignty, but how will that sovereignty be asserted, be enacted, be lived and codified in a hostile geopolitical landscape? How does our own sovereignty as individuals and as increasingly united collective get claimed, get leveraged consciously, coherently for the freedom of all? So how do we navigate these intense energies in the weeks ahead as Mars and Pluto move into this exact opposition, which they will do in a day or two, and Neptune gets to activating both through various aspects? What practical steps are there for us? First, we can recognize that this intensity is purposeful, right? The sky is not random. These patterns are revealing tensions that need resolution, transitions that need to occur. This week is the week that the pimple pops. I'm so sorry to use that metaphor, but we are finally at this precipice. We are finally at this pinnacle of escalating energy, of the hill on the roller coaster, right? Where multiple major planetary configurations are converging. And it's because multiple aspects of our collective experience need transformation simultaneously. And so it shall be. We have to be discerning about the theater of it all, though. Neptune's influence makes everything more symbolic, more dramatic, more emotionally charged. This can be beautiful and inspiring, but it can also be manipulative. Ask yourself, when you are consuming spectacle, is that spectacle serving authentic spiritual values, or is it disguising power plays behind spiritual language? All of us are capable of conducting that disguise. We have to also attend to our personal relationship with these energies, right? The Mars-Pluto opposition is asking each of us, how do you relate to power? Do you give your power away too easily? Do you resist all authority? Are you a tyrant, capital or lowercase t? Even when guidance might be helpful. The passing of a major spiritual leader like the Pope invites everyone to reconsider their relationship with spiritual authority, with power generally, and with their God. So look for the emergence of new forms rather than just mourning what's dissolving. This moment is about endings and beginnings. So while we grieve what is being lost, what is being undone, perhaps irrevocably, old structures fall, but new possibilities emerge if we have eyes to see and the courage, Mars, to cause. Transformation, Pluto, is available, is in the mix, in the air right now. When we honor the skyline where Pluto sits, we notice that that transformation is for the collective, for our common humanity. Finally, we have to practice this compassionate discernment. Neptune can make us either too idealistic, losing touch with reality, or too cynical, rejecting idealism and as delusion. The middle path is to remain open to spiritual inspiration while applying careful discernment about how it manifests in the world. As a practical exercise, when you encounter shocking or trying news this week, which you will, ask yourself what deeper pattern is revealing itself here? What is dissolving? What is trying to emerge? Then choose one small thing to do that aligns with that emerging rather than that dissolving energy. Whether it's a religious institution facing leadership transitions or a nation fighting for sovereignty, or each of us personally navigating the most intense planetary weather as it rattles our own personal lives, right? This insight holds true. Liberation is just the beginning. The real work comes in becoming what we become, following this liberation, this undoing. This requires us to move beyond both naive optimism and cynical despair. It asks us to participate consciously in shaping what comes next, rather than simply reacting to events as they unfold. As we close, I want to offer three things. First, as always, an action. Be kind to somebody you don't know this week. Go out of your way to help and be kind to people you never met before this week because they need it or because you feel like it. Laugh with a stranger. Help a body trying to pull something too hard off alone. Be of use when someone's caring too much this week. Say good morning out loud to people this week, even if you're in a place like I am in New York where people do think you're strange when you do that. When a customer service rep asks you this week how you are, actually answer them and ask them with some curiosity about how they are. How are things turning out for you this week? I had an experience a couple of days ago in a bank where a young man noticed my birthday and said, we are both Virgos. And I said, oh, you must be going through it right now. This is a really hard time for those of us who are born in that part of the sky. And he said, why do you know that? My father died a month ago. Why do you know that? I was like, I just know what's possible. I don't know the exact thing, right? It's because we can look at the weather. So everyone around you is going through it, is going through some level of intensity as this thing undoes all of us and the institutions in which we live. So we are all going to have this week, let's have it together so that we are constantly all day building what comes next. Second, I want to invite a reflection. Where in your own life are you experiencing this tension between liberating and claiming ownership of what follows? Are there areas where you've broken free from something, but you haven't yet established what comes next? How might you be more consciously shaping the aftermath of your own liberation? And third, a poem. I want to close, if you'll allow it, with Rilke's Ninth Duino elegy. Given everything we've discussed today about transformation, about claiming ownership of our liberated selves, about finding our way through these intense planetary storms, Rilke speaks to exactly this moment. He writes about the threshold we're crossing, not just as individuals, but as a collective, about how we transform pain into praise, how we make meaning from disillusion, how we find what's internal within what's passing away. This poem feels especially resonant today as we watch old authorities dissolve and new forms emerge, as we navigate between Neptune's spiritual idealism and Mars's call to action, as we stand at this cosmic crossroads. It is what it is, y'all, between what's been and what's coming. Rilke reminds us that transformation isn't passive. It requires us to actively participate in renaming our world and choosing what we carry forward. So here's Rilke speaking across time about precisely the work we're being called to do, the work of transformation, the work of praise, the work of claiming our role in this great turning. Let these words accompany you as you move through this intense week ahead, as you navigate your own thresholds between liberation and claiming ownership of what follows. The ninth Duino Elegy. Why, if this interval of being can be spent serenely in the form of a laurel, slightly darker than all other green, with tiny waves on the edges of every leaf, like the smile of a breeze? Why then have to be human and escaping from fate, keep longing for fate? Oh, not because happiness exists. That too hasty prophet snatched from approaching loss, not out of curiosity, not as practice for the heart, which would exist in the laurel too, but because truly being here is so much, because everything here apparently needs us. This fleeting world, which in some strange way keeps calling to us, the most fleeting of all. Once for each thing, just once, no more. And we too, just once and never again. But to have been this once completely, even if only once, to have been one with the earth seems beyond undoing. And so we keep pressing on, trying to achieve it, trying to hold it firmly in our simple hands, in our overcrowded gaze, in our speechless heart, trying to become it. Whom can we give it to? We would hold on to it all forever. Ah, but can we take along into that other realm? Not the art of looking, which is learned so slowly. And nothing that happened here, nothing. The sufferings then, and above all, the heaviness and the long experience of love. Just what is wholly unsayable. But later, among the stars, what good is it? They are better as they are, unsayable. For when the traveler returns from the mountain slopes into the valley, he brings not a handful of earth, unsayable to others, but instead some word he has gained, some pure word, the yellow and blue gentian. Perhaps we are here in order to say house, bridge, fountain, gate, pitcher, fruit tree, window, at most column, tower. But to say them, we must understand, oh, to say them more intensely than the things themselves ever dreamed of existing, isn't the secret intent of this taciturn earth when it forces lovers together, that inside their boundless emotion all things may shudder with joy. Threshold, what it means for two lovers to be wearing down imperceptibly the ancient threshold of their door. They too, after the many who come before them and before those to come, lightly. Here is the time for the sayable. Here is the homeland. Speak and bear witness more than ever. The things that we might experience are vanishing, for what crowds them out and replaces them is an imageless act, an act under a shell, which easily cracks open as soon as the business inside outgrows it and seeks new limits. Between the hammers, our heart endures, just as the tongue does between the teeth, and despite that, still is able to praise. Praise this world to the angel, not the unsayable one. You can't impress him with glorious emotion. In the universe where he feels more powerfully, you are a novice. So show him something simple, which, formed over generations, lives as our own, near our hand and within our gaze. Tell him of things. He will stand astonished, as you stood, by the rope maker in Rome, or the potter along the Nile. Show him how happy a thing can be, how innocent and ours, how even lamenting grief purely decides to take form, serves as a thing or dies into a thing, and blissfully escapes far beyond the violin. And these things, which living by perishing, knowing you are praising them, transient, they look to us for deliverance, us, the most transient of all. They want us to change them utterly in our invisible heart. Within, oh, endlessly within us, whoever we may be at last. Earth, isn't this what you want? To arise within us, invisible? Isn't it your dream to be wholly invisible someday? Oh, Earth, invisible. What, if not transformation, is your urgent command? Earth, my dearest, I will, oh, believe me. You no longer need your springtime to win me over. One of them, even one, is already too much for my blood. Unspeakably, I have belonged to you from the first. You were always right, and your holiest inspiration is our intimate companion, death. Look, I am living. On what? Neither childhood nor future grows any smaller. Superabundant being wells up in my heart. Y'all, is it well in yours? This poem reminds me of what's important. I'll leave it at that. If you'd like to understand how these patterns are affecting you personally, it would be my great honor to look into that with you. I offer readings that help you navigate your unique relationship with these energies, your unique moment, your unique assignment for this life of yours. Knowing your gifts and knowing your strengths and understanding your opportunities and your invitations will help you get through. My email is in the episode description, so come, let's talk and see what you see. Until next time, remember that while planetary cycles create the context, it's the humans reacting to and working with those energies here on Earth that make the world what it becomes. It is not all yet written. I'm just here to tell you what the energetic weather is. What we do with that stormy sky is entirely, and I mean entirely, up to each of us. So until next time, as you harbor your free will, be well, be conscious, and be kind.